Bonjour classe, aujourd'hui on va parler de chapitre 4.2. Dans chapitre 4.2, on va parler de exchanging information. Now, before we get too deep into this, I want to make this explicitly clear to you. In the previous étape, we had lots of faire expressions and we had lots of jouer expressions that require faire, the verb faire, and expressions that require the verb jouer. I told you that you needed to know which expression was a jouer expression and which expressions were faire expressions. And I'm going to keep on telling you that. This information is not going anywhere. So if you did not learn which expressions were faire and which expressions required jouer, you need to go back and learn that. You need to do this for this étape. So let's go ahead and get started. Looking at your note sheet, Roman numeral number 1, we have exchanging information expressions. Number 1 underneath that, it says, what sports do you play? And it is, qu'est-ce que tu fais comme sport? Répétez-moi, qu'est-ce que tu fais comme sport? If you remember in chapter 3, we saw this esca here, and I said, don't let that freak you out. I know it looks like a lot. Don't let it freak you out. It's just saying, hey, what you're about to read is a question. That's it. Don't try to translate it, just a question. It still is just saying, hey, what you're about to read is a question. However, now we have this QU apostrophe on the front of that esca, making it qu'est-ce. And that QU apostrophe is saying, hey, this is a question, but your question is going to start with the word what. What? So, what sports do you play? Qu'est-ce. What do you do to have fun? Again, what? Qu'est-ce que tu fais pour t'amuser? Répétez-moi. Qu'est-ce que tu fais pour t'amuser? Répétez-moi. Qu'est-ce que tu fais pour t'amuser? All right, on your note sheet, if you're taking notes, skip past those two verb boxes for just a moment. And down at the bottom, underneath those two verb boxes, I gave you two examples. I play golf and I do track. This is a good way to respond to these two questions. I play golf. Je joue au golf. I do track. Je fais de l'athlétisme. Je fais de l'athlétisme. And this is why I started off by saying, if you didn't know what expressions required jouer and which expressions required faire, you need to go back and relearn those, because now we're going to be still using those verbs. In the previous étape, we kept jouer and faire in the infinitive form, and we used our good old regular ER verb aimer that we've been working since chapter 1, and we were saying, I like to play golf. I like to do track, so on and so forth. However, now we're using these jouer and these faire expressions from the first étape, but now we're conjugating these verbs. We're conjugating jouer and faire. We're not saying I like to do this, I like to play this. We say I do this, I play this. So again, you need to know which expressions require faire and which expressions require jouer. All right, going back up to those verb boxes, regular ER verbs. We have our example, jouer, which means to play. To play. Remember, this is the infinitive. It's the to form of the verb. And as I go through this conjugation of the verb jouer, if you're still not quite sure how I conjugate a regular ER verb, I'm going to be reviewing every single verb that we know how to conjugate at the very end of this PowerPoint. So just hold tight. Je joue, tu joues, elle joue, nous jouons, vous jouez, elle joue. I play, you play, he, she, one plays, we play, you plural play, they play. And then we have a brand new irregular verb. And remember, an irregular verb is a verb. It doesn't have any patterns. It doesn't have any endings. There's no rules to follow. You just have to memorize the way it is. Our first irregular verb was avoir. Remember, avoir pour la possession. Go ahead and sing that song to yourself now. Get it stuck in your head. We're dealing with a new irregular verb, and it is faire. Faire means to do or to make. And again, it's irregular. There's no patterns. There's no endings to memorize. You just have to memorize the way it conjugates. I have a song for you that we're going to be playing in class, but these are your conjugations. Je fais, tu fais. Il, elle, on fait. Nous faisons, vous faites, ils, elles font. Répétez après moi, s'il vous plaît. Je joue, tu joues. Il, elle, on joue. Nous jouons, vous jouez, il, elle joue. Are you repeating? Répétez après moi. Je fais, tu fais, il, elle, on fait. Nous faisons, vous faites, ils, elles font. Bon travail. All right. In our previous chapter, chapter 3, we learned en, une, and des. And we said if you have en, une, or des in a negative sentence, that en, une, or des changes to de or de apostrophe. We're going to be continuing that grammar rule, and in addition to en, une, or des, we have du, de la, and de l'apostrophe that we learned in the previous etape, chapter 4.1, and we're adding on to that grammar rule by saying if du, de la, or de l'apostrophe are in a negative sentence, then they change to de or de apostrophe as well. For example, je fais du théâtre, I do theater. I do theater. Je ne fais pas de théâtre. There's this ne pas sandwich in here, so we can't have this do here. We change it to de. Il fait de la natation. Il fait de la natation. I swim, or I do swimming. Il ne fait pas de natation. Il ne fait pas de natation. We have this ne pas here. We can't keep this de la here, so we change it to de, de. I do swimming, or I swim. I don't do swimming. Remember, we only choose de apostrophe if the following word starts with a vowel in A, E, I, O, or U. Everything else, we're going to be choosing de, de. All right, we have seen en several times already. However, now we're going to officially learn it. We've talked about it in the past, glossed over it once or twice, but we really haven't talked too much about it. So, en is conjugated just like the il and the elle singulier forms. That's why when we conjugate our verbs, I say il, elle, en, and then your verb. Conjugated just like the il and elle singulier form. However, it has two meanings. Our first meaning, which we talked way back when we were first learning all of our subject pronouns, our je, our tu, our il, elle, en, nous, vous, il and elle pluriel. Our first meaning that we've already talked about, it is that it can mean one in general. And I like to use this example of your ELA essays. If your ELA teacher has ever told you you cannot use the word you in an essay, they've probably also told you to try to replace it with the word one. This is the same concept as this word one here in French, this en. So, on joue au foot pour maigrir. One plays soccer to lose weight. We're not talking about anybody in particular. We're just talking about somebody in general. Another example for you. One must study hard to do well in French. There's countless examples. It can mean one in general. Also, in conversational French and informal French, French between two very close friends, it can mean we. For example, on fait du vélo. On fait du vélo. We ride bikes. Now, you may be saying, well, monsieur, we also have the nous form, and we learned that nous also means we. And you're exactly right. Nous form means we in formal French. If I'm talking to Dr. Nugget, I would be using the nous form. However, if I'm talking with a close friend, I'm most likely going to be choosing on to mean we. It's slang. It's conversational speak. Also, make sure that you have this down. Even though on can mean we, it's still conjugated as the il and el singulier forms. Don't conjugate it as a new form. You're wrong. En, when we're using it to mean we, even when we're using it to mean one, en is always going to be conjugated as the il and el singulier forms. All right, moving on to the weather. This is Roman numeral number 4 in your notes. It says weather. What's the weather like? Quel temps fait-il? Quel temps fait-il? Répétez après moi, s'il vous plaît. Quel temps fait-il? Quel temps fait-il? Répétez-moi, il fait beau. Il fait beau. Il faut il fait chaud. Il fait chaud. Il fait froid. Il fait froid. Are you repeating? Il fait frais. Il fait frais. Il pleut. Il pleut. Il neige. Il neige. I have these last two starred in your notes with a little asterisk. As your notes say, it says these are verbs, not expressions. These are not fair expressions. To say it's raining, il pleut. The verb faire is not required. To say it's snowing, il neige. The verb faire is not required. They're verbs, and they're only conjugated. The only forms that this verb is conjugated in, the only ones that it exists in, is the il and el and en form. Il, el, en form. And that's because we wouldn't say I rain or I am raining. It makes no sense. So the only verb form that these verbs exist in is the il singulier form. Il, el, en. Il pleut, it's raining. Il neige, it's snowing. All right, going on to Celsius. Most of the world uses Celsius. The United States, we use Fahrenheit, including Alaska and Hawaii is right over here. There's a couple islands down here that use Fahrenheit as well. Couple islands over here that use Fahrenheit, and then this one sole African country that uses Fahrenheit. Everywhere else in the world, though, uses Celsius. In fact, in most of your science classes, when you're gathering data, you should probably be taking those measurements in Celsius in your science classes, because most of the world uses Celsius. If you haven't touched on that yet, you will definitely learn that in high school. So, 0 degrees Celsius, il fait froid. 15 degrees Celsius, il fait frais. At 30 degrees Celsius, il fait chaud. Again, degrees Celsius is a degree C. Degrees Fahrenheit, what we use is a degree F. Now, if you know anything about our temperature scale, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, degree F, is below freezing for us. 32 degrees Fahrenheit is freezing. However, if you look at the Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius, it's hot. So make sure that you know the difference between Fahrenheit and Celsius. So to calculate degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius, you subtract 32 from your degree Fahrenheit, and then you divide by 1.8. This may come up once or twice, not something that you really need to worry about, but you might want to memorize that for future reference. Subtract by 32, then divide by 1.8. All right, moving on, Roman numeral number 5, that V, months of the year and seasons. You need to know these. See your previous notes. We've already talked about the months and the seasons. If you remember, that was a quiz where a lot of people didn't do well. So many people didn't do well that we actually redid it that day in class as groups. So I encourage you, if you cannot say your seasons and your months, you need to go back and learn those or relearn those. You need to know these. Let's go over these together. Répétez-moi. En hiver. En hiver. So we're asking what we do or what somebody does in a particular time or a particular season. The first one under bullet point 5, it says in a month. You're going to write in a month. It's going to be en and then your month. En décembre, en janvier, en février. En and then a month. In a month equals en and then a month. In a season is en and then your season, except for spring. Spring is a little bit funky. Where instead of en here, we have o. That's the only one you need to know, o. Everything else is en. All right, répétez après moi, s'il vous plaît. En hiver, en décembre, en janvier, en février, au printemps, en mars, en avril, en mai. Are you répéting? Répétez-moi en été, en juin, en juillet, en août, en automne, en septembre, en octobre, en novembre. If you need to remember your seasons or your months of the year, here are some review videos for you as well. You can watch those on your own time. All right, moving on to telling when you do things. Again, that first column, we're going to go over these in just a moment. That second column, in winter, in spring, in summer, in fall. En hiver, au printemps, en été, en automne. Write those down. That first column, on vacation, in the evening, on the weekends. En vacances, répétez-moi, en vacances. Le soir, le soir. Le weekend, le weekend. All right, that is the end of your notes. Let's go ahead and review every single verb that we know. This is a very, very, very valuable tool to you right now if you struggle with these verbs. Even if you don't struggle with these verbs, again, this is a very valuable tool. I'm going to go over literally every single verb that you know how to conjugate right now. Our first set of verbs that we learned were regular ER verbs. How do we conjugate them? We take the ER off of the infinitive. And then you add your memorized endings. Again, I say memorized because at this point in the game, they should be memorized. If you do not have them memorized, I've added the song right here for you. In addition, if you go onto Google Classroom, under the classwork tab, the very first section is Bienvenue. We have our syllabus, we have our classrooms, the playlist of the classroom songs that I play in class. And then you're going to see it says French 1 verbs. And in there is a YouTube playlist that has the songs that we use for all of our verbs and the video lesson done by somebody else, not me. So if me explaining it is confusing to you, maybe somebody else explaining it will help. And then I also have a Quizlet folder linked that has a review of every single verb that you know how to conjugate, all of those rules. So, ER verbs, take the ER off of the infinitive. Again, the infinitive ends in that ER. It's the to form of the verb. Écouter is the infinitive. To listen to or to listen is the infinitive in English. And then we add our memorized endings. Again, these need to be memorized by now. E-E-S-E, O-N-S, E-Z-E-N-T. All ER verbs that we know are as follows. Aimer, adorer, danser, écouter, étudier, parler, regarder, trouver. If looking at these, if you don't know what any of them mean, if you don't know what écouter means, if you don't know what étudier means, you need to know those. This is old information. Remember that there are 3 ways to translate all of these verbs into English. So we have one form in the French, for example, j'aime, and we have 3 different translations into English. I like, I am liking, I do like. That's ER verbs. Moving on to GER verbs. GER verbs. How are GER verbs different than ER verbs? Well, they follow the exact same patterns as regular ER verbs, what we were just talking about, except we have to add an E before the new ending. Again, this is old information. All of this is going to be old information until we get to fair. If you don't know how to conjugate a GER verb, you need to know this. All of the GER verbs that we know: nager, manger, voyager. Again, you need to know what these mean as well. Nager means to swim, manger means to eat, voyager means to travel. Je nage, tu nages, il nage. Just like normal. As soon as we get to the new form, though, we have to add that extra E in there, nous nageons, and then we continue just like normal. Vous nagez, il nage. All right, our third verb that we know how to conjugate is avoir, and avoir means to have. Again, I've put the song here for you. You can also find it on Google Classroom as well. Remember that avoir is irregular, which means there are no patterns or no rules to memorize. There's no endings. You just have to memorize the way it conjugates. And that's why I gave you another song for it. Avoir, avoir pour la possession. And it is j'ai, tu as, il, elle, on a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. And then our last verb in our little verb review is faire. Again, this is our new irregular verb. Faire means to do or to make. Faire also has lots of expressions as well. For example, those expressions for the weather. You're literally saying it does beauty, it does cold, it does hot. We wouldn't say that in English though, it's an expression. I've linked here the YouTube lesson for you as well, and then the song. So, going over this conjugation, répétez-moi, je fais, tu fais, il, elle, on fait, nous faisons, vous faites, ils, elles font. I've also gone ahead and put in a couple of example sentences for you, one for each of our subject pronouns. Je fais de la natation. I swim. I am swimming. I do swim. Tu fais du théâtre? Do you do theater? On fait les devoirs? Are we doing the homework? Nous faisons la pizza. We're making pizza. Vous faites de la photo? You all are doing photography? Ils font un pull. They're making a sweater. All right, and that is all that I have for you for chapter 4.2. I hope this video lesson helped you. Au revoir. À bientôt.